Lyra's thoughts churned between inquiry and revelation. For centuries now, the question had haunted Elven scholars. Why had the human realm transformed into what they now called the Deathrealm? Yet even as her mind wrestled with this puzzle, the answer shimmered before her in the scrying basin, a single word blazing in Elder script upon the water's surface: arrogance. Lyra stared at the basin with the hollow gaze of someone utterly drained, her emerald eyes wide as if witnessing a miracle divination born from her own effort. The simple word floating in the water mocked the enormity of her sacrifice, a full year spent gathering components that existed only in the rarest corners of the world. Moonlit tears from the weeping willows of the high plains, collected drop by precious drop during the winter solstice. Crystal sand from the northern caves, where she had waited 3 months for the local tribe to allow her entrance. A month buried in the archives followed, her mind struggling to comprehend the archaic runes of divination, texts so old their pages threatened to crumble at her touch. Sleepless nights parsing the intricate syntax of power words that could unravel a mind unprepared for their weight. The Codex of Far-Seeing alone had taken 2 weeks to decipher, its warnings about the price of truth written in the blood of previous seekers. Then came the week of preparation, day after day of channeling exercises, meditation rituals, and practice castings that left her drained and trembling. Her mana reserves, relatively small thanks to her young age, had suffered to keep up with her determination. The casting itself had consumed an entire day, from dawn's first light to the dying breath of sunset. She had woven the spell at the cost of all her mana and a few extra crystals, pouring her very essence into the working, layer upon layer of intent and power, until she felt her soul scraping against its limits. And now, with her mana well utterly emptied, and her body swaying on the edge of collapse, the truth stared back at her from the still water: arrogance. Faced with the weight of that single word, Lyra slowly lowered herself to sit cross-legged beside the basin, seeking to recover what little mana she could while her mind grappled with the revelation. The cool stone floor grounded her trembling body, but nothing could settle the turmoil of understanding that came with being a rare young elf in a society where everyone was older than 1,000 years. At barely 3 decades old, she existed as an anomaly among her people, a child in a realm where the youngest council member had seen 1,000 winters pass. The gulf between her experiences and theirs stretched wider than any ocean, leaving her perpetually isolated in conversations that referenced events from before her birth, as if they were yesterday's news. While her elders spoke of patience cultivated over millennia, Lyra burnt with the restless energy of youth that had nowhere to flow, no friends to share. For generations, young elves like herself had found solace in the human realm, there, among mortals, who lived and loved and died within a single elven coming of age. The young found kindred spirits who understood urgency, passion, and the desperate need to matter now rather than in some distant future. Humans wouldn't expect her to have the wisdom of ages to have something in common. In human land, she could be young without apology. But that path had been severed for her generation. One by one, the young elves who ventured into human territory simply never returned. No bodies, no messages, no trace. Just silence that stretched until even the most patient elders began to worry. And now she knew why, or at least she had a clue. That single word floating in the water explained everything and nothing. Arrogance. Hours of contemplation yielded nothing but deeper frustration. Finally, Lyra uncrossed her legs with a resigned sigh. Thinking in circles would accomplish nothing. She needed to speak with someone who had actually walked among humans in a distant past and returned to tell it. Even if that someone was the last person in the realm she wanted to ask for help. Lyra rose from the cold stone and walked toward the wooden shelves that lined her tree dwelling, her bare feet silent against the polished heartwood floors. Among the countless tomes and scrolls, her fingers found what they sought, a small dragon statue carved from obsidian, its surface worn smooth by countless touchings. She clutched it tight and sprinted toward the great arched window. The moment she threw open the carved shutters, the autumn wind struck her at once. Cold air rushed past her face and caught her long silver hair, sending it streaming behind her like liquid moonlight. She gripped the statue tighter as the gusts threatened to tear it from her grasp. Outside, the world had surrendered to the storm's fury. Heavy clouds churned overhead in shades of slate and charcoal, their bellies pregnant with rain that had yet to fall, but promised to unleash torrents. The wind howled through the great oaks and silver-leaf trees, bending even the mightiest branches until they groaned in protest. Not a single elf moved through the walkways and bridges that connected the tree city. Even the dwellers like herself had retreated to the warmth of their homes. More telling still, the ancient ones had vanished entirely. Those elders so powerful and attuned to nature that they typically needed no shelter, who often stood like living statues in their favorite groves regardless of weather, had withdrawn to whatever hidden sanctuaries they claimed when the world grew too fierce even for their timeless patience. Not worried about the weather and holding tight to the dragon statue, Lyra's face contorted with disgust before she'd even fully formed the thought. The ritual to contact the dragon avatar was humiliating beyond measure. Yet her trembling hands clutched the obsidian statue as her logical mind warred with her revulsion. She needed answers. This was her only path forward. Gathering what remained of her shattered dignity, she pursed her lips and spat onto the carved dragon's face. Their saliva glistened against the polished stone for a heartbeat before the statue's eyes erupted in molten gold, throwing yellow light on the walls of her dwelling. "The price has been paid, young elf," the voice rumbled with ancient authority that seemed to vibrate through her bones. Then, with unmistakable amusement, all the tone of ancient authority was gone in a heartbeat. "And if you're willing to spit on me again, you can ask 2 questions instead of 1. Lyra's entire body recoiled as if slapped. Her emerald eyes blazed with fury as she snarled, "You perverted dragon!" Her knuckles went white around the statue. "I'll shatter this thing if you—" The dragon's laughter cut her off, rich and mocking, reverberating through the chamber until her teeth ached. "You wouldn't dare. I'm too useful." Without hesitation, Lyra flipped the statue and pressed its carved face against the wooden floor, her palm flat against its back. The golden glow seeped between her fingers like captured sunlight trying to escape. "Try me." The laughter died. When the voice returned, it carried grudging respect. "Ask your question, young one." "What does arrogance have to do with my kind, being unable to enter the human realm anymore?" she demanded. The dragon's response came slowly. "I wouldn't reveal everything I know about the humans for a single spit. It's a long tale, and I would be at a considerable loss." The obsidian surface grew warm beneath her palm as the creature's interest sharpened. "But I can smell divination magic clinging to you like incense smoke. Fresh magic. Powerful magic. Oh! Perhaps the young elf has been disobeying her elders regarding the human realm." Lyra's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The dragon's chuckle was soft and knowing. "This intrigues me greatly," it continued, its voice taking on a tone of genuine curiosity, mixed with ancient cunning. "I'll tell you everything you wish to know about the human realm, but first you must answer my question. Do we have an accord?" She weighed the offer, her fingers drumming against the statue's back. Finally she nodded. "Fine. What do you want to know?" "Are you planning to travel to the human realm?" The question lingered. Lyra's first instinct was to deny it, but something in the dragon's tone warned her against deception. She shifted uncomfortably, but the statue's weight seeming to increase in her hands. I'm interested in going there," she admitted reluctantly. "I have to understand what arrogance has to do with all the deaths of my kind when they visit the human realm. The divination gave me that word, but no context, no understanding." The dragon's form seemed to vibrate with satisfaction, the golden light glowing brighter for a moment before settling into a steady glow. "I was raised by humans," it began, its voice taking on an almost nostalgic cadence. "Long ago, on an island they called the Sun-Rising Land, when I was merely a hatchling no larger than your fist." The dragon's tone grew dismissive, tinged with ancient superiority. "But those humans were primitives in a world nearly devoid of mana. No fight, no magical weapons, no long-range communication. Creatures who celebrated the forging of sharp metal as the height of achievement." The statue's eyes blinked as the dragon's certainty filled every word. "Humans are primitive, and arrogance belongs to your kind, young elf. Those ancient elders who've forgotten what it means to be humble. They are the true masters of that failing. Even I, in all my draconic pride, pale beside their absolute conviction of superiority." Lyra pressed her lips together and forced herself to pause, her mind racing as she weighed the value of her remaining question. The dragon had already proven himself crafty with words, and she couldn't afford to waste this opportunity on poorly chosen phrasing. She turned the obsidian statue over in her hands, feeling its weight as her thoughts crystallized. Yes, arrogance did fit her people perfectly. Every record of humanity painted them as simple creatures with lifespans so brief they barely registered in Elven consciousness. Beings whose greatest achievement had been providing entertainment for young elves like herself. For generations her kind had treated the human realm like a playground, using their magic to awe and impress these short-lived mortals who possessed no power of their own. Some young elves had treated their helm as pure entertainment, and some had even harmed humans for fun, using them as playthings to test their magic. The humans were too primitive and mana-blind to understand that they were witnessing, too simple to pose any threat to beings who wielded forces beyond their comprehension. But if that were true, how could arrogance have transformed their realm into a place of death for her kind? The contradiction gnawed at her, pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. How could mere primitives become dangerous to immortal beings who commanded the very elements? Then, like lightning splitting the dark sky outside her window, a thought struck her, brilliant and terrible in its implications. Her breath caught as the possibility took shape in her mind, so obvious now that she wondered how she'd missed it. Finally, she spoke. "Dragon, is there a chance that humanity has learned magic? That they've grown tired of our visits and discovered how to defend themselves? That this is why their realm has become a place of death for my kind?" The dragon's laughter erupted from the statue with such force that golden light spilled between Lyra's fingers like liquid fire. "Oh, young elf, There's not a chance in all the realms that humanity has developed magic. The creature's mirth was so intense that the black surface vibrated against her palms. Listen carefully to one who has walked their mannerless world, the statue continued. Even master elves, beings who have spent centuries perfecting their craft, would require a full month to recover their mana reserves in the Earth realm. A full month. The atmosphere there is so thin with magical energy that it's like trying to breathe underwater. The statue's eyes glowed brighter as the dragon's explanation grew more animated. And you think these short-lived creatures, with their short lifespans, could somehow master what takes elves millennia to achieve? Human apprentices wouldn't even be able to sense the threadbare mana that clings to their world like morning dew. They would die of old age before feeling so much as a whisper of power. The dragon's tone turned almost pitying. Their realm is a magical desert, child. What little energy exists there dissipates faster than they could ever hope to grasp it. Trust me, I've seen their fumbling attempts at what they call alchemy. Lyra's frustration boiled over. But then what could arrogance possibly mean? The dragon's voice took on a slyly suggestive tone. Perhaps if the young elf would step on me with her bare foot, I could give this puzzle the hours of thought it deserves. Without hesitation, Lyra hurled the statue to the wooden floor. It struck with a sharp crack, and the golden light in its eyes flickered once before fading to black, lifeless rock. I'll figure it out alone, she declared to the now silent dragon, her voice echoing in the empty chamber as the storm raged on outside. Lyra stared down at the fallen statue for a moment, and then her gaze landed outside. The wind continued its relentless assault against the shutters, rattling them in their frames like an impatient visitor demanding entry. She had never attempted what she was about to do. No young elf would willingly choose such discipline when excitement and curiosity burned so fiercely in their veins. Yet she lowered herself to the floor beside the silent dragon, crossing her legs and straightening her spine in the traditional meditation posture her elders had tried so desperately to teach her. For once, she would embrace their patient, just for a single night. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Midnight came and went, marked only by the subtle shift in the storm's intensity. Rain finally began to fall in heavy sheets against her windows, each droplet a percussion note in the symphony of her restless thoughts. Her silver hair, still disheveled from the wind, gradually settled around her shoulders like a luminous cloak. Possibility after possibility flickered through her mind, one after the other. Perhaps the elves had grown too careless in their treatment of humans, revealing too much of their nature. Perhaps some ancient treaty had been broken, some sacred boundary crossed. Maybe human kings had grown wise to elven manipulation and declared war on all magical beings. Each theory felt plausible for a moment before crumbling under scrutiny, leaving her more frustrated than before. The storm raged on, matching the tempest in her thoughts. Through the long watches of the night, only one certainty remained. Arrogance was the key. Her people's arrogance had somehow transformed a realm of harmless entertainment into the Deathrealm that scholars now whispered about in fearful tones. Young elves ventured there and never returned, their fates unknown, their silence absolute. As dawn's first light began to filter through the storm clouds, painting the sky in shades of pearl and rose, Lyra felt no closer to understanding the puzzle. But something else had crystallized in the crucible of her all-night vigil, a decision that would have horrified her cautious elders. She would go to the human realm herself. Rising from her meditation with joints stiff from hours of stillness, she made a silent vow to leave her own sense of superiority behind. She would force herself to see humans as equals, no matter how difficult such a perspective might be for one raised among immortal beings who commanded the elements. It was a radical plan, perhaps even heretical by Elven standards. The very thought sent ice racing through her veins. She knew it was reckless, beyond reckless. Young elves had been disappearing in that realm for centuries, but she was exhausted by isolation among jaded elders who had forgotten what it meant to burn with purpose. If traveling to Earth and surviving meant abandoning her own arrogance, then so be it. At least that was her plan. As she stood in the growing morning light, watching the last of the storm clouds dissipate into wisps of grey, her body trembled at the prospect of opening a gate to the realm where so many of her peers had met unknown fates. Initially, she considered fleeing deep into the Silverwood, far from the heart of Elven civilizations, where the dimensional ripples of her portal might go unnoticed. But even as she began gathering supplies, the futility of such caution became apparent. The elders' senses were so keen, their magical awareness too vast. They would detect the disturbance regardless of distance and arrive in time to stop her. No, if she was to do this, it would have to be quick and decisive. Open the portal and cross it. No second guessing. Lyra moved through her dwelling as tension built inside her, collecting everything that might aid her survival in a realm hostile to magic. Her fingers closed around 3 dense mana crystals, each one containing enough power to sustain a lesser elf for months in their own realm, though she suspected they would be drained within days in the mana-starved human world. She packed dried moonberry wafers and starfruit preserves, foods that would maintain their potency even in magical dead environments. A small vial of healing elixir went into her satchel alongside crystallized phoenix tears for emergencies. Standing in the center of her chamber, supplies secured across her shoulders, Lyra drew a shuddering breath. "I'm ready," she whispered to herself, though her voice trembled with more fear than conviction. She raised her hands and began weaving the simplified dimensional spell that countless young elves had performed before her, the same magic that had carried them into oblivion. The air shimmered with her mana, reality bending like heated glass as she took control of the elements, using them to tear through the fabric between worlds. The portal stabilized into a disk of swirling silver and black, its edges being light with unstable energy. Almost immediately, she felt it, the crushing weight of awareness turning toward her location. Ancient minds, vast and terrible in their power, suddenly focused on her disobedience like 1,000 burning suns. The elders were coming. Now or never, Lyra gasped, and without allowing herself another moment to think, she threw herself forward into the portal. The reckless flame of fearless youth propelled her past doubt, past terror, past the screaming voice of reason inside her mind that begged her to reconsider. The last thing she heard before the portal collapsed behind her was the thunderous crack of displaced air as the first elder materialized in her now empty chamber. Lyra tumbled through swirling darkness before reality reasserted itself with jarring suddenness. She landed hard on unfamiliar ground, her knees striking packed earth and fallen leaves that felt somehow wrong beneath her palms. Rising unsteadily, she brushed dirt from her robes and took her first breath of human air. The absence of mana hit her like a mental blow. Where she expected to feel the familiar taste of magical energy flowing through everything around her, there was only emptiness. Almost a total void that her stomach lurched with vertigo. She reached instinctively for the ambient power that should have been everywhere, only to grasp at nothingness. The realization struck her. If she wanted to return home, she would either have to drain the precious crystal she'd brought, or wait months for her depleted mana reserves to slowly recover in this barren realm. Ancient trees stretched overhead, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the strange sunlight of this world. Yet even surrounded by what should have been familiar woodland, Lyra felt utterly displaced. The very ground beneath her feet seemed to reject her presence, the soil too dense, the air too thin, the light too bright and unforgiving. Her silver hair, which moments ago had flowed with magical energy, now hung dull and motionless, the strands feeling lifeless and strange against her shoulders. Her emerald eyes, accustomed to seeing the subtle auras that surrounded all living things, found only flat, mundane surfaces that offered no mystical depth. Everything about this realm felt hostile to her nature. She was a creature of magic trying to exist in a world that had seemingly forgotten such forces ever existed. The wrongness of it settled into her bones like a persistent ache. Yet despite the alienation coursing through her very essence, her heart hammered against her ribs, full of anticipation rather than fear. Somewhere in this strange, mana-dead forest, she might finally encounter a human being. For the first time in her 30 years of existence, she might find some semblance of connection with another soul who understood what it meant to burn with urgency, to matter in the present moment rather than across endless centuries. The possibility made her hands tremble with something that wasn't entirely terror. Already consumed too deep in impulsiveness to care about conversation, Lyra raised her hand and released a thin wave of mana in a tracking spell. The precious energy spread outward from her fingertips, like ripples in a pond, and within minutes a mental image began forming in her mind. A hazy map of the few hundred meters surrounding her position. The image wasn't particularly clear, wavering like a reflection in disturbed water. Most of what she sensed registered as the dull, lifeless signatures she expected from this mana-starved realm. But there, perhaps 200 paces to the east, was something different. A strange spot that seemed so slightly different, with the vague aura of a being similar to her own proportions, yet fundamentally unlike anything in her experience. Without hesitation, Lyra began running toward the anomaly, her bare feet striking the forest floor with each step. For the first time in her life, she felt dirt clinging to her skin, actual grime that wasn't swept away by the natural flow of mana that had always surrounded her body like an invisible shield. The sensation was foreign and unpleasant, but she ignored it completely. Branches caught at her robes and thorns scraped against her legs as she pushed through the untamed forest. Pain blossomed across her shins and forearms, real, immediate discomfort that her magic couldn't automatically heal in this depleted realm. Yet she pressed forward, driven by curiosity that burnt hotter than any physical hurt. Finally, she burst through a tangle of undergrowth and stopped short. Before her stood what appeared to be a tent, but crafted from a material unlike anything she had ever encountered in her 3 decades of life. The fabric was smooth and artificial, colored in vivid blues and oranges that seemed almost aggressive in their brightness, and it possessed a strange, unnatural evenness that should be impossible for some primitives to craft. Immediately, Lyra caught herself and felt a surge of guilt. Primitive? The word echoed in her mind like an accusation. If treating humans as equals might mean the difference between life and death, she couldn't afford such condescending thoughts, even in the privacy of her own head. She forced herself to take in the campsite with fresh eyes, trying to see it as the work of beings deserving respect, rather than creatures to be dismissed. A circle of stones contained the cold ashes of what had clearly been a controlled fire, evidence of intelligence and planning. Nearby, metal implements gleamed in the dappled sunlight. Their surfaces bearing intricate patterns and joints were obviously the creation of sophisticated craftsmanship. The tent itself, with its precise seams and impossible evenness, suggested manufacturing techniques far beyond anything she had imagined humans capable of. But it was the flat, rectangular object lying open on the ground in front of the tent that truly captured her attention. It resembled nothing so much as a flat viewing portal, the kind of advanced magical scrying device where people used to observe distant places. Yet this one radiated absolutely no mana whatsoever. Its surface was dark and reflective, like the finest mirror, but somehow more perfect than any natural stone. Moving images played across its surface. A small four-legged creature with brown and white fur, its tongue lolling out as it bounded through what appeared to be another location entirely. The images moved with impossible clarity and life, as if the device were displaying visions without any magical energy to sustain them. Unable to resist, Lyra crept closer and cast an analytical spell, pouring more of her precious mana into understanding this mysterious artifact. The magical probe struck the object and immediately rebounded with such violent force that information crashed into her mind like a tidal wave. Fragments of incomprehensible knowledge, numbers, symbols, connections that defied all logic, flooded her consciousness in a torrent too vast and alien for her elven mind to process. The backlash sent her staggering backward, spots dancing before her vision as she nearly collapsed to her knees. When her sight cleared moments later, she was no closer to understanding what she had encountered, only certain that she had glimpsed something far beyond her comprehension. The tent's opening rustled, and suddenly a figure emerged that made Lyra's breath catch in her throat. The human was unmistakably male, with wild, unkempt hair that fell past his shoulders in tangled waves, and a thick, unruly beard that covered much of his face. Strange objects rested over his ears, sleek, white devices that seemed to curve around them with no visible connection to anything else. He held between his lips a thin, cylindrical object that glowed orange at one end and produced a thin curl of smoke that carried the pungent scent of burning leaves. The smell hit Lyra's sensitive elven nose like a physical blow, foreign and harsh compared to the clean, herb-scented fires of her homeland. The human froze mid-step when he saw her, his eyes widening with the same shock that must have been written across her own features. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other, two beings from different worlds suddenly face to face. Then the aftershock of her spell hit her harder than she'd realized, and Lyra's knees buckled beneath her. She sank to the forest floor, one hand pressed against her temple as waves of magical exhaustion crashed over her. The human pulled the burning cylinder from his mouth, releasing another puff of acrid smoke, and spoke. A string of sounds that flowed together in patterns completely unlike any language she had ever heard. His voice carried concern, but the words themselves were nothing but meaningless noise to her ears, as incomprehensible as the wind rustling through leaves. Panic seized Lyra as the human's incomprehensible words washed over her. Without thinking, she reached for one of the most basic spells any young elf learned, the language spell that would allow her to understand and be understood by any thinking creature. She felt her remaining mana reserves drain completely as the magic took hold, leaving her utterly depleted in this hostile realm. The human spoke again, and this time the words formed meaning in her mind. "Holy shit, this weed must be the good stuff." She blinked in confusion at the strange phrase, but before she could process it further, the human continued speaking, his voice filled with amazement and disbelief. "I mean, I've been smoking some primo stuff, but seeing actual elves, absolute cinema." He rubbed his eyes vigorously with the back of his free hand, then stared at her again as if expecting her to vanish. "You're still here? Damn, either this is the most realistic hallucination I've ever had, or..." He trailed off, taking another draw from the burning cylinder and exhaling slowly. "Or I'm having the most insane camping trip of my life." The human's words were clearer now, but their meaning remained baffling. He seemed to think she was some kind of vision brought on by whatever he was consuming, and his casual amazement was nothing like the reverence or fear she had expected from encountering someone like her. Okay, the human said, taking another drag and squinting at her through the smoke. "This is either the best cosplay I've ever seen, or I'm way more baked than I thought." He gestured vaguely at her with the burning cylinder. "You lost or something? There's no Renaissance fair around here for like 50 miles. Lyra stared at him in bewilderment. Though the language spell allowed her to understand his words, they carried an accent and cadence completely unlike anything she'd ever heard, as if he truly was speaking another tongue entirely, despite her perfect comprehension. "Cosplay?" she repeated, struggling to her feet on unsteady legs. "I don't understand that word." The human's eyebrows shot up. "Damn! You're really committed to the bit, aren't you?" He looked her up and down, taking in her authentic elven robes and silver hair with growing appreciation. "Those ears look incredible. What you use? Latex? Silicone?" "I need to examine your belongings," Lyra said urgently, gesturing toward his campsite. "Your magical artifacts." "Whoa! Hold up." The human laughed, a sound both warm and incredulous. "Lady, I don't know what kind of weird forest encounter fantasy you're living out here, but you just found a random dude camping and immediately asked to rifle through his stuff. That's, He paused, considering. "Actually, that's pretty weird, even for someone as high as you obviously are." "High?" Lyra touched her head reflexively. "I'm not elevated above anything." "Oh, honey." The human's expression shifted to something between amusement and concern. "You're tripping balls right now. What you take? Mushrooms? 'Cause you're way too far gone to be wandering around the forest alone." Frustration blazed through her expression. "I'm not from your realm. I'm an elf from—" Yeah, I got it." He held up a placating hand. "You're from the magical kingdom of, wherever. Look, I may be stoned, but I'm way more sober than you are right now, which means I'm responsible for making sure you don't, fall off a cliff or something." His expression grew stern. "Seriously, what kind of friends let you wander off in this condition? That's incredibly irresponsible." "I have no friends," Lyra admitted quietly. The human's stern expression cracked, and he actually laughed, not mockingly, but with sudden understanding. "Oh man, that explains the whole elaborate fantasy cosplay thing. I get it now." But his tone quickly turned serious again. "Still doesn't make it safe to get high alone in the middle of nowhere. You could seriously hurt yourself out here." Rage flared in Lyra's chest. Why couldn't he just believe her? Without warning, she stepped forward and grabbed the human's free hand, pressing his fingers against one of her pointed ears. "Feel that? Are those the false ears of your cosplay?" The human's eyes widened as his fingers traced the delicate cartilage, feeling the way it naturally tapered to a point, the warmth of living flesh, the fine network of veins beneath translucent skin. He dropped the burning cylinder, his hands trembling slightly as he explored the impossible reality of her ear. "That's—" He swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That's not possible. I must be way higher than I thought." He pulled his hand back and stared at it as if it had betrayed him. "Okay, Luke, you need to cut back on the good stuff, because this is getting a little too real." He was doubting reality now. Really, desperation drove Lyra to reach into her satchel for one of her precious crystals. She held the smallest one aloft and channeled what little energy it contained into the most visually spectacular spell she knew. a cascade of silver light that erupted from her palm like liquid starfire, dancing through the air in spirals before coalescing into the shape of a magnificent phoenix that spread luminous wings before dissolving into sparkling motes. Luke's jaw dropped. The color drained from his face as he watched the last of the magical light fade. Holy! That was... He sat down heavily on a fallen log, his legs apparently no longer willing to support him. That was real. That was actually real. Yes, Lyra said, swaying slightly from the effort. Now will you listen to me? Luke looked up at her with an expression caught between wonder and terror. You're actually an elf? Yes. And you came here in my tent because? I need to understand what happened to my people. We used to visit your realm, but now they call it the Deathrealm because no young elf who enters ever returns. She met his wide-eyed stare with desperate intensity. Humanity has changed, and I need to know why. I need to talk to you. Really talk. All night if necessary. Can I stay here? Luke ran a hand through his messy hair, still staring at her. This is insane. This is completely insane. He glanced at his tent, then back at her. You wanna... what? Come into my tent and interrogate me about human civilization? If you'll permit it, yes. He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Finally, he laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. You know what? Why not? This is already the weirdest day of my life. Might as well lean into it. He stood up and gestured toward his campsite. I'm Luke, by the way. Luke Henderson. And yeah, fine. We can talk all night. Just promise me you're not gonna murder me or steal my soul or something. Lyra blinked in surprise. She had expected suspicion, fear, maybe even worship, but not this casual acceptance. I promise I mean you no harm. I'm Lyra. Cool. Lyra the elf. Luke shook his head, still seeming dazed. My therapist is gonna have a field day with this story. As they settled beside his tent, Luke reopening the strange flat portal device that had first caught her attention, Lyra found herself bombarded with questions she'd never thought to ask. How had humans achieved such sophisticated magic without any mana? The moving images on the device, the perfect synthetic materials, the intricate metal tools, all of it spoke of magical mastery that should have been impossible. It's not magic, Luke insisted for the dozenth time as dawn light began filtering through the trees. It's technology, science. We figured out how to manipulate matter and energy through understanding natural laws, not by channeling some mystical force. But how do you power such complex enchantments without mana? Electricity, chemical reactions, nuclear fusion in some cases. Luke rubbed his eyes, clearly exhausted but still engaged. Look, I know this is hard to wrap your head around, but we don't have magic. Lyra stared at the laptop screen, where the small furry creature, a dog, Luke had called it, continued its endless loop of joyful bounding. Your people have discovered ways to capture and replay moments of time, to speak across vast distances, to create materials that don't exist in nature. And you claim this isn't magic? Not magic. Just really advanced problem solving. The first hours after sunset crawled by with agonizing slowness, their conversation a dystopian example of mutual incomprehension, despite the language spell's perfect translation. Luke gestured enthusiastically at his laptop, trying to explain circuits and processors and wireless signals, while Lyra watched in growing bewilderment as he described forces that sounded exactly like magic, but which he insisted were something entirely different. When she demonstrated a simple light conjuring spell, Luke stared in fascination, but kept muttering about energy conservation and thermodynamics, as if those words explained away the impossible. As the night deepened and stars emerged overhead, different constellations than those that grazed elven skies, their conversation grew more animated and more frustrated. Luke pulled out his phone, showing her videos and photographs, trying to explain cameras and digital storage, while Lyra attempted to describe how scrying pools worked and why mana flowed through certain materials but not others. Each explanation only seemed to deepen the other's confusion. But where does the power come from? Lyra asked for the 100th time, watching Luke charge his device from a small rectangular box connected to thin black panels that had been absorbing sunlight all day. Solar energy, converted to electrical energy, stored in lithium-ion batteries. Luke replied with the patience of someone who had been repeating the same concept for hours. It's just physics, energy transformation, following natural laws. That's exactly what magic is, Lyra exclaimed, throwing her hands up in exasperation. You're channeling the sun's energy through specially prepared materials to power your enchantments. But it's not enchantments, it's, Luke stopped mid-sentence, rubbing his temples. God, we're going in circles. The deepest part of night found them both sitting in exhausted silence, staring into the dying embers of Luke's campfire. Occasionally one would try a different approach, Luke attempting to explain the scientific method, Lyra describing the theoretical frameworks of magical study, but each foray into explanation only highlighted how fundamentally different their worldviews were. As dawn's first light began to creep through the forest canopy, they made one final, desperate attempt at understanding. Luke drew diagrams in the dirt, showing atoms and electrons and electromagnetic fields. Lyra countered with her own sketches of mana flow patterns and dimensional resonance theories. They compared notes, pointed at similarities, argued over differences, and ultimately arrived nowhere. When the sun climbed higher, painting the forest in shades of gold and green, both of them fell silent from sheer exhaustion. They had talked through the night, 20 hours in a row, each trying to explain their world to the other, and both had failed spectacularly. I think, Luke said finally, yawning widely, we should probably get some sleep. I just can't do this anymore. Lyra nodded, her own eyelids heavy despite the momentous nature of their meeting. But as she prepared to rest, a terrible understanding crystallized in her mind. Arrogance. The word that had started this journey now revealed its meaning with perfect, awful clarity. Her people had come to this realm expecting to find primitives, simple creatures to amaze and manipulate with casual displays of power. They had never bothered to truly observe, to listen, to understand. They had seen humans' lack of mana and assumed inferiority, never recognizing that these beings had developed entirely different forms of mastery that were, in their own way, just as sophisticated as elven magic. When young elves arrived on Earth with their condescending attitudes and parlor tricks, expecting awe and worship, they instead encountered a species that saw them as curiosities at best, threats at worst. Humans who had built flying machines didn't need to be impressed by levitation spells. Humans who could speak across continents weren't amazed by voice transmission magic. Humans who had unlocked the power of atoms weren't cowed by lightning bolts. The young elves had died, perhaps trying to fight humanity, perhaps as experiments somewhere, perhaps as victims of a first contact misunderstanding. She had no way to know how. As she drifted towards sleep beside the human, both too exhausted to care about anything else, one final question haunted Lyra's thoughts. If arrogance had been the doom of her people, what was the proper response to this revelation? Should elves learn to see humans as equals? Or should they humble themselves enough to recognize humans as their betters in this strange, mana-starved realm where intelligence alone had achieved what raw magical power could not? The journey ahead, for both their species, would indeed be quite a battle of understanding.